Radio check. Loud and clear. Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
One stop. He's making cut with his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It's another edition of Mode Push, an American view of F1, our podcast where we break down everything in the F1 world according to our view here stateside. Alex Kirry, your host, Dan Jimenez, your other host, as usual, joining us. And we were just, as we were chatting about stuff to get going on the program today, Dan, we have so many things to jump into because we have the actual race that happened in Spa last weekend. And then we have all of the front half of the year to kind of do a little bit of some poor man's fake awards for the first half of the season. So we have a lot of fun things to cover today. First, this is something you and I didn't really break down at all because I like just kind of jumping in fresh on these things. Impressions of Spa and kind of how the race ended up. And it seems like we're getting, aside from Max Verstappen, it really is a mixed bag every dang weekend, which I think you could be kind of excited about, all things considered.
Yeah, that's the story of the season. And this weekend was just more of that, where if and there's a lot of people out there like on Twitter and such that are running these scenarios, like if Red Bull just didn't exist, what would this season look like?
It's not even that. It's like if Max didn't exist. Right?
Even if Max didn't exist, it'd be the closest title fight we've ever had, with like both the drivers and the constructor championships would be within like 20 points between first and second, and within like 50 points like first through fourth or something. So it's been an amazing season, with the asterisks of just Max being the most dominant, driver that we've seen in a long time. So on the whole, the weekend I thought was, very entertaining. I think, 20 laps into the race, 14 laps into the race, whenever Max took the lead, we knew what was going to happen then. But I think through the sprint and qualifying and everything, with the rain coming and going, I think it was a pretty entertaining weekend.
It was kind of funny to watch Checo for one brief moment think that he may, like he's going, this is what I was talking about before the season. This is what I was going to be champion. Like in those, like, remember, I don't know how many races it was into the season. Was it Max had 3 and Checo had 2, and they were going into Miami? And then he kind of, I think in that 6th or 7th race, he kind of craps the bed, and you're kind of like, oh man, no, but this next one, he might be able to show up. And it's just like race after race, Max just keeps just absolutely obliterating, not just the entire field. Like, I'm trying to figure out if it's more embarrassing to be Checo or if it's more embarrassing to be like, Ferrari, who, is just like, we're the 4th or 5th best car this weekend. We don't know. Or when they finish on the podium, they go, it's awesome, but we're not even close to to Red Bull. I mean, it's just so hard. Would everybody in this car would Charles Leclerc finish 22 seconds behind Max if he were in that other Red Bull?
That's the big question. And even this week, there was an interview with Lewis Hamilton where he said that if he was in that car, that he would be giving Max a tighter, competition than Checo is. So I think the other drivers are even speculating that they could be doing better in that seat than Checo. And I think that there's no question that Lewis is a better driver than Checo. But the target continues to come back to him. That he was our only chance at a competitive drivers championship. And ever since Max got around him in Miami, there's been no looking back. So fortunately, I think the die has been cast on who the championship driver champion is going to be this year. And so what we're playing for the rest of the year is to see how I think the other teams progress in the back half of the season and start to make it more competitive and hopefully drum up a more tighter fight for next year.
You and I had kind of signed up Williams to be the semi-super. I don't know why we would ever go, watch out for Williams this weekend. Like, I mean, I know Alex Albon's had some pretty good stretches, and Logan Sargent keeps getting close, but those guys were, I don't know. I shouldn't pile on and go, Williams was the most disappointing to me, but I was really thinking that Logan Sargent was going to score his first points there. I think Daniel Ricciardo could be lumped in that list of guys who underperformed in that one, especially considering that kudos to Yuki, who showed up and goes, stop talking about Daniel Ricciardo so much, and scores a point for a normally pointless AlphaTauri team who go into these races. I think Esteban Ocon was he the driver of the day? I think after everything, he may have been. At least he received a lot of votes, because I think he went from 16th to 8th, and he kind of drove the wheels off of that thing. There was not necessarily there weren't anybody who really stood out for me. I thought it was great that Charles had a competitive Ferrari, competitive with 2 through 8. But I mean, the reality is that after this weekend, I don't know what you have in Mercedes still. I don't know what you have in McLaren still. I don't know if anybody at Ferrari knows. I think you should be pretty excited if you're these other teams, because you go, look, we're going to the summer break, and we're kind of all right there. And that should at least give some hope to these teams, talking about 2 through 7 on the grid, I guess.
Yeah, there's lots of opportunity there for everyone to still fight for the second in the Constructors' Championship. And I think Spa was interesting because we went into it hyped on Williams and hyped on McLaren, but for 2 different reasons. That Williams is really good in a straight line, and McLaren is really good, high downforce. But I think that what that showed is that they were both too kind of extreme in their approaches. And, Williams was getting crushed in the middle sector because they got no downforce, and McLaren was getting crushed in the first and third sector because they've got too much drag, where Red Bull was able to just kind of have a more of an all-around setup, and in Mercedes as well, and Fernando finishing 5th is a little bit better than he's been doing recently. So I think it's interesting. You got Aston and Mercedes, which are kind of like still trying to be a good all-around car. Yeah. And you've got McLaren that's going all in on high downforce, and then Ferrari. I think they're still kind of a high speed. They'll do better at high speed courses, kind of like a Williams. But then, Red Bull's just untouchable everywhere.
Interestingly enough, I think that a lot of folks are looking at these at all these races so far, and they're kind of seeing, okay, you know who your champion's going to be, you know who the best team's going to be, but it's also one of these things where, I think that you look and you say there's some hope, not necessarily that Red Bull's going to get run down. The real question is going to be, like, will they totally give up on this year's car? Not give up, but will Red Bull just go, you know what? We're so freaking far ahead of everybody. Let's go all in on next year's car, which would also be a disaster for F1 if they really figure it out even for next year. Is there a way that these teams can kind of mitigate the Red Bull run that they're having right now? Or is it just like kind of an inevitable that they just are going to have the right car for a while till Adrian Newey goes away?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's stuff built into the regulations that tries to even the field every year. And obviously with Red Bull having less wind tunnel time, like less aero development time this year, they'll have less next year again. So we're getting to the point where they're running out of wind tunnel time, while the other teams are going to continue to be able to develop throughout this year. So yeah, they're I'm sure getting to the point where there's not really any more development on this year. They're thinking about next year, and let's just hope that in the back half of the season, these other teams can actually kind of catch up while Red Bull is kind of put on pause in terms of aero development. So yeah, we've got 10 races left. I think we're 13 races down, and there's still a lot of season left for these teams to do a lot of development. So I think that will be the big tell is what's going to happen the back half of this year. Like Lewis, I think of about a month ago or so, was kind of calling for F1 to restrict teams from even being able to start working on next year's car before the season's over with, which is, I think, just impossible to enforce. Right. I don't know how you would do that.
No, I mean, I think just by itself to be able to make the argument of, listen, the safety regulations on their own would be enough for somebody to go, we need to always be developing how to make this car safer for our driver. You could always throw that in there and go, we're not allowed to touch the car till the end of the season or until the next season starts up. You're asking a lot for these guys, and you're probably asking some people to lose their jobs at some of these factories. They're already asking people to look forward to these races. They're already asking full teams inside of these teams to work on next year's car.
Yeah. You're not going to just ask half your team to twiddle their thumbs and just be like, okay, we can't think about next year's car at all, because this year's car influences next year's car. So it's just a unrealistic scenario for sure.
Okay. Now that we've gotten through the Belgian Grand Prix and it was just such a nail biter, just like all the rest. Although I will say there was a little part of me that was kind of excited when Lewis got that fastest lap on the very final lap of it. Only because, and not that we'll ever know what was said, by Max, maybe in the post-race, debrief that they have, maybe a couple of Dutch cuss words, but that kind of stuff irks Max because he's too intense of a competitor, right? I mean, like that's the kind of thing, and that's probably what makes him such an insane driver in the first place. But him getting nipped an extra point from, of all people, Lewis Hamilton, just for fun, to be like, kind of give him the old, from however far away, the middle finger. I mean, you couldn't even see the middle finger from how far away he was, but I think that was kind of fun for him. Let's go through some of our end of the first part of the season. I know it's not technically the half of the year, but when they take the summer break, we kind of make it the de facto half of the season. So let's go through some of these. I have not, or you tell me, have we gone through these yet? Have I given you the opportunity to make these yet? Or is this right off the top of your head?
Oh, top of my head. We have not heard it. I have not heard any of these yet.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's go first. I think best driver, it'd be pretty easy to say Max Verstappen, and so let's just kind of give that we'll rubber stamp that one, but let's go with...
That one's out of the way.
Let's go with next best driver. So second best driver, because that's very difficult to go at right now considering the last handful of races.
Yeah, it's hard to parse through the driver versus the car development, but man, the first name that comes to mind to me is Fernando Alonso. I feel like he's getting more out of that car than his teammate by the largest margin, and he's putting it on the podium. And at the beginning of the season, he was super competitive with the Red Bull. So it's just crazy. He's the kind of the old dog on the grid, but I think he's at top form. So I'm going to give that one to Fernando.
Okay, so I wonder if Fernando was like, I think. Because I get the recency bias thing too, where I'm like, yeah, Fernando is fine, except for how many podiums was he on at the very beginning of the season? Was it 3 in a row? Was it 4 in a row? Either way, he's been the most shocking. I certainly had the early season success. I'm going to go with, shoot. I guess I'll relinquish and I'll say Fernando also. Although I don't think he's the second best driver right now, and that's not to do a Simpsons like you're the second best driver so far. Like I just want to because I don't necessarily think that it's him, because car development might put somebody like Lando there, might even put Lewis there, might even put someone from Ferrari there. But I think we can all kind of look at that and go, all right, fine. We'll throw that one up in the air. But again, no one's saying Checo, even though he's second in the points, right? It's easy to go, oh, he won a couple of races. Of all the races that have been won, he's won 2, and then there's Max and nobody else. And so it's funny that we don't give him that respect, I guess. I mean, maybe I'm insane for saying that, but okay. Biggest disappointment from the year so far. Biggest driver disappointment from the year so far. This one could be pretty easy.
Sergio, I think, in my mind.
Not Nick DeVries, the guy who got fired?
Oh gosh. Time moves fast. I had already forgotten about Nick, that we had lost a driver. So pouring out for Nick.
Oh, poor guy. Dan doesn't even respect you enough to think that you still existed in the sport. Okay. All right. Checo could be.
Nick. Yes.
Checo's a good pick, though, because compared to what you should be doing. And again, he's second in the points race. So, I mean, I guess we can't be too upset about it.
So just relative to the equipment that he's in, I have to feel like he's been the biggest disappointment, because the rest of us want to see him fighting for the championship and think, why is he not right there on pace every single week with Max? So I think I'd put him there. Man, some of the other ones, I think Charles has been pretty disappointing this year after a super competitive 2022 with a title fight that he had going into through the first half of the season. That I don't know. I just look at him and I feel like he's really down on himself.
Yeah.
he's kind of moody on the radio with his team.
He's down on the team for sure.
I don't think the attitude is there. But what's crazy is there's rumors that they've already inked a deal, an extension for him, that he's got a 2-year plus a 3-year driver option already lined up. It hasn't been official, but that's the rumor flying around that he's sticking with Ferrari.
I love how you're like really stretching to give an award for the worst on the grid to Charles. You're like, but let's not forget about how amazing Charles has been and how bad and how kind of a crummy teammate he's been. Speaking of what's crazy about that is that Carlos Sainz has been absolutely forgettable in most of this too. Like I don't even think about Ferrari.
Yeah.
And it's disappointing because Charles just had a podium, and then they're all, "Hey man, third place." Is like, "Yeah, it's okay," And just like you were saying, I mean, to what you were saying, it was just like he's disappointed in himself, he's disappointed in the team. I don't know. I mean, this is a guy who's probably overperformed a little bit in his recent drive. So let's go with this one then. This one has a little bit more of a positive spin to it. Most improved driver and or most improved team, or both.
I'm going to say most improved team has to go to Aston Martin.
For sure.
Most improved driver, that is a good one. Maybe Yuki or Albon. I might give it to them. I think those two are getting surprising results in their cars, and it's cool to see them running in the points.
I mean, there's no wrong answer here, Dan.
Yeah.
But you were wrong for sure. Like on that.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm going to go. So I agree with you on Aston Martin. I'm going to say Nico Hülkenberg has been like
yes.
I mean,
yeah.
he's shown up, and this is a guy who. How long was he out of a seat? 2 years, or was it just one? I'm trying to figure out what the.
No, at least 2. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but he showed up, and he's put himself in Q3 like a handful of times. Was he on the front row? Maybe on one of those, or at least like maybe in a sprint race. Remember when he led that sprint race? I think maybe 3 or 4 races ago for like 7 laps or something like that. I mean, it's just insane, and you can't do that unless you have something put together. So I'd say Nico on the most improved, just because we haven't seen him in the sport for a minute. What about biggest surprise? Could be team, could be driver.
I would say Oscar Piastri.
Okay.
I think a rookie that in the last few weeks is competing for podiums, putting the car on the front row of the grid. I think, the way he came into the sport was very dramatic. And I think I was kind of down on him, just thinking like, man, he really rug pulled Alpine there. And I don't know. There was so much talk about Nick DeVries as being like the golden child. Like he was coming in 28 years old, tons of experience, won a championship in Formula E and F2. And, he flamed out like we've already talked about. And then I think Piastri's showing that he's legit. Yeah. So I think he's my biggest surprise.
I'd throw in a positive for most surprising with kind of McLaren overall. I was really glad to see that they kind of figured their stuff out, and that Lando has been – as he had I think he's had 2 P2s, right? And that I mean, considering where they were at the beginning of the year, those are legit P2s too. Those aren't like, hey, a handful. Remember, I mean, it just seems like everybody is driving so much better right now. Nobody is putting each other out of the race that much. You're not seeing nearly as many DNFs. The reliability, even though these are newish cars and newish regulations, I think everybody's done a pretty good job of staying on track and keeping their cars to the end of the race. So I would say McLaren is the biggest surprise for me as a team, just because I assumed that they'd kind of thrown in the towel on the year. And you probably could have, because everybody else said, yeah, you know what, you guys kind of stink. But kudos to them, because they probably saved Lando looking around at least for a minute, somewhere else outside of the MTC. And so I think that one was a big one. And then my negative on biggest surprise is Alpine. Like, Gasly's been not very good, but firing your technical director, firing your team principal, all those things adding up into one mean you guys have basically thrown up the white flag, which is appropriate for the French team. I didn't want to have to say that, but here we are. And I think that like they're definitely not just underperforming. I mean, like, poor Otmar, like he rolled in, he had the rug pulled out from under him with a young driver. He kind of treated the Fernando situation like it was, oh, Fernando's just big timing us, we can't even get a hold of him. And now we're starting to find out that the reality of that is they fumbled that deal and they botched it. So Alpine's been a massive surprise in the sense that we thought they were going to be right there with everybody else, and they should be. But you think about the last few races, despite Ocon's drive this last week, this team has been miserable all season long so far. So I'll throw them in there. Biggest underachiever, considering what they should be. I'll go with Mercedes. You think about what the backing is. You think about what the expectations are. You think about how recent history puts them winning, being Max Verstappen. I mean, Lewis Hamilton was Max Verstappen. In terms of the equipment that he was in, nobody could touch him. The races got boring, lest we forget that, that's where we were every race. And it wasn't just, it was like, it was Lewis, it was Valtteri. I mean, that team was untouchable, and they had seasons, they had constructors' titles wrapped up, same type of thing this time of year. And I'd say underachieving, and I'd say that I'd say that Mercedes should be doing a lot better than they are. I think the easy answer would probably be Ferrari, but for me, Mercedes has been disappointing too.
Yeah, Ferrari's the other one that comes to mind that they should be performing way more than they are. I mean, they're right now the fourth or fifth fastest team on the grid. I mean, that is a serious underachievement for, we used to talk about the best of the rest, and like the best were Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, and the rest was everybody else. And I don't think we talk about them in the same way anymore, right? The other team that comes to mind is Haas. Like they have just, I mean, Nico has done an amazing job qualifying. He can put down a crazy lap. The racing has been a bit harder, and then Magnussen has just been a complete donut, I think, all year. He's just, I don't think he's done anything consequential. And, this is the year that they were supposed to make big strides because they got the big new sponsor. They're spending to the cost cap, all that. And I just think that they're, if they're not, careful, they might end up dead last in the points after, once Williams and AlphaTauri kind of get going a bit more.
All right, I'm going to give you one big guess on what team is going to surprise us in the second part of the season here after the summer break is over. Although, I mean, teams aren't really developing in the break; they're not allowed to really work technically. So, who makes the second part of the season kind of continues maybe on a path of success, and then who doesn't?
I think AlphaTauri might be one that surprises us. I think that they might be. There seems to be like a kind of a shift, mindset shift going on there at that team. They know that next year they're moving to Red Bull or moving to England to be close to Red Bull and use their same facilities. They're getting a new team boss. Some bigwig from Ferrari is coming over to be the new team boss starting next year. You got, Danny Ricciardo's bringing in a bunch of energy. Yuki's fighting for, his spot on the team. So I think that you'll see AlphaTauri make a big switch in strategy to being much more like the Red Bull junior team than the just like kind of associated with Red Bull, but we're really our own thing over here in Italy. And I think with all the access that they have there to the Red Bull stuff, I have to think that they see a large improvement and leapfrog some of these bottom of the field teams.
This might be a moment that it might be harder to do. So I'm going to put you through your paces here, but favorite moment of the year so far?
Ooh, that's a good one. Oh, man.
I'll share one. You start thinking about it. I think that, and we forgot about it because I was actually kind of going through and trying to figure out what kind of some cool moments were. Do you remember how exciting the Australian Grand Prix was? Like, that was and it stinks too, because I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that because it's like, I loved all those crashes, man. Like, I love the two Alpines, the two Alpines putting themselves in the, in the ditch, and having both of those pink cars next to each other against the wall at Albert Park was quite wild. And Carlos Sainz getting penalized that one for I think spinning out Alonso, and then there were I think there were 3 red flags, and I think they even ended under I mean, I can't remember how it ended, except for the fact that it was just like, yep, that's it. Yeah, everybody, show's over.
Yeah, it was another red flag, and then they did a single like parade lap around, and they finished under the safety car.
Right, and that's usually boring, but I think the race overall kind of showed us, one, okay, this is not just a Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, maybe McLaren. I mean, we were starting to see Aston Martin go, nah, man, we're the second best team. And they're not now. I don't think we look at them and say, no, they're for sure the second best team on the grid. And so that was kind of a moment where we had sort of a, it was a 2-lap shootout kind of to finish, but it wasn't really. I mean, I just really loved that whole race overall. It just felt exciting. There were a lot of moments in there. So. All right, but there was a moment for you where you were at least yelling at the screen at some point. Maybe that was I can't remember what it was.
That's what I'm gonna say. Yeah. I would say Silverstone and have seen McLaren get up there and Lando taking the lead there at the beginning, and then even fighting after the safety car, kind of fighting and keeping up. Like I believed, like for 3 or 4 laps, I believed McLaren is back. They figured it out. Mika Hakkinen was right. They are going to fight for this win. So I would say that's a top memory. And then I think Monaco was a great race with the rain coming in and out and all the tire strategies, and Alonso, if not for that bad pit strategy call that they made, I think he would have won that race. That was a pretty exciting one.
These are off piste a little bit on the on awards, but biggest baby of the year has to go to Toto Wolff so far. The whiniest billionaire you've ever met. And we have a lot of whiny billionaires, right? Not necessarily in this sport. He might be the only one. But Toto Wolff, we're throwing in the towel. Like, we're just being no side pod. We are going back to something totally different. We're going to have a different car concept. He's just so pouty. And I think he's a little bit grumpy, too, that he doesn't get, when Mercedes isn't performing, the camera is hardly ever on him anymore, and I think that bums him out a little bit.
Yeah. Before you even said Toto, my mind was Mercedes as a whole. I think both Lewis and George have been pretty whiny this whole year.
Yeah.
And it's like they have no memory of their own stint of 7 years, 8 years of championships. And they don't think of that at all. They just say oh, we really got to fix the sport. It's not good for the sport to have one team so dominant.
That's exactly right. Everything is like the sport is broken. But this is the same. Toto is the same guy. I love how Toto is he Austrian? He has to be because he's just as Arnold. He's just Arnold. And so when he's like, the package is not competitive, and then when he says, we're not getting the respect, and the sport is broken, and he goes through all these things, and then everybody goes, dude, where have you been? What are you doing? And then when he also just goes, I think part of it has been, he pounds the table and stuff, and I think he wants that as a reaction. There's no more Michael. No, there's no more of that because they're not even competing. But this is the same guy who. The only, when we first got to know him during Drive to Survive, what was it? The stopwatch is always the only thing that matters. And you're going, remember? That was his whole theme, It's like he shows
super
up.
German.
Yeah, and he just doesn't, the stopwatch is the only thing. And you go, except for when you're losing. And then it's like, no, we cannot develop cars early, and you're going, geez, man, this is ridiculous. Okay. Any other last minute awards you want to throw in there? Those are the only ones I had. That was just kind of the normal ones, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to throw any out there that you felt like were...
Let's do... Okay, so most embarrassing moment of the season. I'm going to say most embarrassing moment was Zhou Guanyu screwing up the race start in was it Hungary? He qualified 5th, amazing qualifying, and then screws up the race start, and everyone has to go around him, and then he runs into the Alpines and knocks them out of the race. And I think that's the most embarrassing moment.
You know what? Again, Dan, no wrong answers. But shall we forget when F1 paraded out all of its media people onto the pit lane before Esteban Ocon came in.
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
Like, that was a possible disaster.
Yeah, disastrous moment. Yeah.
Most embarrassing for F1 and the FIA, maybe. But, yeah, for a driver, I mean, I'm teaching my kid to drive a stick right now, and I was like, hey, don't be Joe Guan Yu and stall it here and have everybody run around us at this light here. So those are all those. Anyone else? Any other ones you want to throw in there?
I would say most forgettable season is maybe Valtteri Bottas. Like, we never talk about him.
That's true.
You know, at least Joe Guan Yu does some things that are kind of exciting. Like Valtteri, he's just like there with 5 points. Like, it's
is it only 5?
From what he's come from, you know, at Mercedes and winning races.
Well,
it's sad to see.
And like everybody is waiting for him to be semi-fun. Like, everybody wants to cheer for Valtteri because he's at Alfa Romeo, and maybe Alfa Romeo's throwing it in because they're going, who cares? We're Sauber next year, and then we're Audi after that. Who cares? But the reality is that, yeah, everybody wants a guy like Valtteri to do well, and he's not performing. He's not performing. I will say somebody with unreasonable expectations going into the second half of the season, Alex Albon. Like, everybody's like, this guy is going to finish at the top, and then I think that Williams has a fast car on the straights and nowhere else on anywhere on planet Earth, and so it's hard to suddenly ask a lot of Williams.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think one more. I think we could put this under the biggest surprise category, but Fernando Alonso's general demeanor and attitude this year.
Oh my!
From being what he was last year to this year is like Mr. Friendly, like, and he's like making comments of like, oh, I saw Lance's turn because I was watching television while I was driving.
I was
and,
like in third place.
His pass was cool. Like, that's been a surprise to see his. And also too, did you see there's a highlight from the pre-race from this last race? There was they were singing the Belgian national anthem, and it looked like some dude out front, like Elton John. He had a cape and he had the Elton John sunglasses, and he was just like so goofy. And they're panning across all the drivers and who are trying to be respectful because it's a national anthem.
And then they got this guy.
You could tell everyone's just trying to not laugh. Like George Russell, you could tell is like biting his lip. And they get to Alonso, and Alonso does like the Jim Halpert look into the camera and just gives it this look.
Gives
of
it
like,
the office.
This is so stupid.
Like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. Man, it's been a good 13 races, and despite the fact that we might complain about it, we're probably watching one of the more historic, a legend in the making with Max Verstappen, and just an insane driver. So we could be grumpy about it, but the reality is we're watching a guy who's pretty darn good, and I think he's going to be good for a long, long time. And so those are my thoughts on the first part of the season here, and we've got a whole second half that we're going to be able to go through as well on the podcast. Dan, it's been a good front half here. Let's have a good second half, huh?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, for Dan Jimenez, I'm Alex Kirry. We'll be back again next week. We'll churn out some of these during the summer break. We don't want to leave you guys in the lurch, and frankly, we don't want to not talk about it as well. So for Dan and Alex, we'll see you next time, everybody.